Are you finding that in other areas as well? Aside from the health bill now, you have jurisdiction over a variety of different bills coming before the Congress. Have you found that same type of political opposition with other?
No, I haven't. We work, as a matter of fact, you remember this, that when we were campaigning to regain the Congress, they said, don't vote. If you vote Democratic, there's two things that are going to happen that you better start worrying about. One, Charlie Rangel will become chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, and John Conyers will become chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. That's going to be bad news for all of you guys, because Rangel's going to raise taxes and Conyers is going to take the Constitution and run it over the cliff.
Do you think that had racial overtones as well?
Well, I'm afraid it did. I'm afraid that the whole idea of getting Obama on health care to prove him a young, ineffective leader probably has some overtones as well.
There are some overtones as well in the health care bill that we do have. I mean, the whole idea behind the bill is to provide additional coverage for people who cannot afford, and minority groups that cannot afford care in the first place.
Yeah, the greater majority of them are minority groups who statistically don't earn as much money to begin with. And that's, one of the things that most people like about the bill is that it raises the threshold for Medicaid coverage so that we have something like 31 million people more that will be eligible that aren't eligible now.
Something that occurred to me the other day is the fact that we have a war in Afghanistan and we have a war in Iraq, and we seem to be providing health care too for those people. How come not for our own?
Well, that's the problem with the financial structure. The budget is in trouble because, to my surprise, President Obama has increased the presence of U.S. military in Afghanistan. The violence in Iraq still continues on, notwithstanding all the billions that we poured into it. And I have taken the position that we cannot solve those problems and differences through military means. It's just, and I'm a veteran of the Korean conflict and a graduate of the Engineer Officer Candidate School at Fort Belvoir. But the fact of the matter is, military might isn't going to get it. And all those drones that we send in, the unmanned bombers that kill and target so many families and kids and innocent people, civilians, how can you possibly win the hearts and minds of people who are living in that?
How else do you do it? Or do it? The question in my mind has always been, why? And we, not going back into history of why we got into it or anything else like that, but if we look at both areas, both Afghanistan and Iraq, these are really tribal areas.
Exactly.
And as such, unless we get those tribal elders and they're never going to be democratized so far as I'm concerned, there's certainly no democracy in these tribal areas.
Well, they never experienced, this is a new system that they've never dealt with for thousands of years, much longer than we've been in existence. And the one thing that we're not going to do is that we're not going to persuade them by increasing our military might over there. Now you said, how are we going to do it, or can we ever do it? Well, that's one way that we know we can't do it. Now there's another way, is trying to assist them in their difficulties of sustaining themselves. Try to deal with the drug population and the drug growing and transshipment.
But that seems to have been really subordinated. The whole question of, and after all, as you remember, I was chairman of the Select Committee on Narcotics.
Right. You and Charlie Rangel were working together in that.
And the one thing that seems to have been totally subordinated in both areas, this we had called at one point the Silver Crescent. Not the Golden Triangle, but the Silver Crescent. And as a result of which, these people have been using drugs in order to finance their and the insurgents have been using drugs in order to finance their war. Now, strangely enough, and I certainly am not in favor of the Taliban, but at the time that the Taliban were in control,
we were working with them.
We were working with them, and you know this is.
Well, look, they over there in their country, they consider the fact that they drove out the Russians when they tried it, and they feel that ultimately the land and the terrain and the mountainous, the whole thing, it's so difficult that they say we'll ultimately drive out the Americans, or they'll give up, and we're going to stay the same. So to me, the military approach is precisely the wrong formula. And guess where that money is coming from? Out of our domestic budget, as we read that in your state and mine, billions of dollars are being cut out of education.
Well, by the way, I want you to know something that has just started.
What?
And that is a program of education. I'm glad you brought it up because it's of great interest to me. There's a new program that will provide a college education, including room and board tuition for $12,000 a year. And do you know where it is? In China.
Oh, gosh. Isn't that ironic?
Yeah.
And then, too, I can't end this discussion without lamenting the fact, looking at the automobile situation in Michigan, is that we are still allowing people to close factories in Michigan and other places and move to anywhere else in the world that they can get a cheaper labor rate. And guess what? They're doing it. As we have a 30% unemployment rate in Detroit, Michigan, a 15% unemployment rate in the state of Michigan itself. And to me, that free trade business is really coming home to haunt us. I wish you were on Ways and Means.
Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you very much for taking time out here at this very, very busy time to appear with us. And I see you wearing a green carnation. Even on St. Patrick's Day, you're willing to come out here on the program.
Well, look, the Black Irish have played a long and traditionally proud history with the Irish in Ireland.
Thanks again, and we hope to have you back in the very near future.
Thank you very much, Lester. Always
and
good
now
to see you.
until our next program, this is Lester Wolf saying so long from Washington.